I thought escaping that room, the one I was held in for 72 hours, would be the end of the nightmare. I was so wrong. It was just the beginning. The taste of freedom, which I thought would be so sweet, was instantly replaced by this constant, bitter fear. The four walls I was trapped in were gone, sure, but now they're replaced by an entire continent. And it feels like his hunting ground. Now, every friendly face could just be a mask. Every footstep behind me could be him. I have to tell this story. I have to get it out there. Not just so people know what happened to me, but because if he finds me, if he catches me again, I need the world to know who he is and what he did. My name is Alex. And I'm still running. It all started with darkness. A deep, confusing blackness that felt heavy, like it was physically pressing down on my eyes. Then came the cold. A damp, seeping chill that worked its way right through my clothes and into my bones. My first real thought wasn't panic, it was just confusion. Where was I? The last thing I remember is walking back to my hotel in a city I barely knew. The cobblestone streets were slick with rain. I remember a car slowing down beside me, someone asking a polite question in a language I didn't understand, and then, just nothing. I pushed myself up, my hands flat against a gritty, cold floor. Concrete. I took a careful step forward and my hand hit a wall. It was tiled. I shuffled to my right, my fingers tracing the cool, smooth surface. Another wall. I turned, shuffled again. Wall, and again. Wall. The space was small. Unbelievably small. Like a big closet or a tiny bathroom. That's when the panic started to creep in, cold and sharp. I took a deep breath, trying to force it down. Panicking wouldn't help me. I must have spent hours exploring that box with my hands and feet. It was a sterile, featureless prison. Tiled walls, a concrete floor, and a heavy metal door with no handle on my side. In one corner, there was a drain, just a hole in the floor. In another, a slow, constant drip of water from a pipe somewhere, creating a small puddle. That was everything. No window, no bed, no toilet. Just the box, the drain, and the drip. Losing my freedom like that, having absolutely no power over my own life, it was a shock so deep it felt like a punch to the gut. My mind started racing with all the what-ifs. Who took me? Why? Was this a ransom thing? A mistake? Not knowing was its own special kind of torture. And then, the door opened. The sudden light was blinding. It hurt. I threw my arm over my eyes and shrank back against the far wall. A silhouette of a man stood in the doorway, tall and broad. He didn't say a word. He just put a plastic bottle of water and a single, dry bread roll on the floor, then closed the door, plunging me back into total darkness. The sound of the lock turning, a series of heavy, metallic clicks, sounded like the end of everything. He was real. This was really happening. I scrambled for the water and bread, my hands shaking. That water was the most incredible thing I'd ever tasted. The bread was stale, but I ate it in seconds. And then I was alone again in the dark, with just the sound of that drip, drip, drip for company. That was the first day. The silence was his weapon. He didn't need to shout or threaten me. The room did the work for him. The darkness, the isolation. He let my own mind tear itself apart. In that first 24 hours, I screamed until my throat was raw. I beat my fists against the door until my knuckles were bruised and bloody. I cried until I couldn't cry anymore. And he never answered. Later, the door opened again. Same silhouette, same blinding light. But this time he spoke. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which was 1,000 times more terrifying than if he had screamed. Screaming is a waste of energy, Alex. He knew my name. The blood in my veins turned to ice. This wasn't random. He knew who I was. He stepped into the room, and I saw him clearly for the first time. He was perfectly dressed in a dark suit. His face was unremarkable, the kind of face you'd forget instantly on a crowded street. He wasn't some monster from a horror movie. He was just a man, which somehow made it all so much worse. "You will be quiet," he said, his tone still perfectly even. "You will be clean. You will eat what I give you. If you follow the rules, you won't be harmed. If you don't." He just let the sentence hang there, the unspoken threat more powerful than any violence. He glanced at my bloody knuckles, then at the scuff marks on the door. A tiny flicker of annoyance crossed his face. It was the first crack I'd seen in his calm exterior. "This isn't how we're going to do this," he said, almost to himself. He left, and the door clicked shut. The darkness was back, but this time it was different. It wasn't just empty. It was him. The next 48 hours were designed to break my mind. Time stopped having any meaning. Day, night. I had no idea. My whole world was just those four walls, my existence measured by the sound of the lock turning. Twice a day, I assumed, he'd bring water and another stale roll. Sometimes he'd talk, sometimes he wouldn't. It was all meant to keep me off balance. One visit, he'd ask about my family or my job, probably just gathering information to use against me. The next, he'd just stand there in silence, watching me, before leaving. My mind started to fray at the edges. I started talking to myself, just to hear the sound of a voice. I'd pace the tiny cell, counting my steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, turn. 1, 2, turn. It was something to do. A way to put some kind of order on the chaos. Little things become important when they're all you have. I focused on the drip of water, timing the drops, making a game out of it. I'd lose myself in fantasies for hours, reliving good memories, imagining conversations with my friends. It was a way to survive, to keep some piece of myself in a place designed to strip it all away. But even as my mind was drifting, another part of it was getting sharper. Survival instinct, I guess. I started to notice things. I had to. It was the only control I had left. I started picking up on tiny details about him and his routine. He always used his left hand to open the door. He had a very slight limp in his right leg when he seemed tired. He wore an expensive watch, and sometimes I'd see the faint glow of its face in the dark right after he shut the door. He was careful, but he was human. And humans have patterns. I learned to listen. I could hear the faint hum of what sounded like a generator, or maybe a furnace. I could hear the distant rumble of traffic, but it was muffled, far away. I figured I had to be underground, in a basement or a cellar. I'd press my ear to the cold floor, straining to hear anything that could give me a clue. The moment that changed everything, the spark that lit the fire, came on what I think was the third day. He had just left, and the silence was closing in. But then I heard it, through the thick walls. It was faint and distorted, but I knew exactly what it was. A child's laughter. It was a sound from another world. A world I wasn't part of anymore. A world with sunlight and parks and parents pushing their kids on swings. And in that moment, something inside me just snapped. It wasn't loud or violent. It was a quiet, firm decision. The despair that had been drowning me was replaced by a cold, hard anger. This was not going to be the end of my story. From that second on, I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a prisoner planning his escape. My observations became focused. I wasn't just watching him, I was studying him. I started searching for a weakness in the room itself. The steel door was a lost cause. The lock was too complex. I ran my fingers over every grout line between the tiles, tapped on every single one, listening for a hollow sound. And near the drain, I found one. A tile that sounded just slightly different. I started working on it, using the edge of my water bottle, then just my fingernails, scraping at the grout for hours in the dark. It was slow, agonizing work. My fingers were raw, my nails were broken and bleeding. But it gave me a purpose. It kept the hopelessness away. And when I finally got the tile out, underneath it, I found nothing but more concrete. A dead end. I felt this wave of despair wash over me, but I shoved it down. I couldn't fail. I had to find another way. My eyes went to the only other feature in the room, the single, bare light bulb high on the ceiling, protected by a wire cage. Leading to it was a thin, old-looking electrical conduit running down the wall. Electricity. The thought was terrifying. But when you're desperate, you'll consider anything. My captor was smart, but he was also arrogant. He thought he had broken me psychologically. He never thought that when you take everything from someone, you also take away their fear of losing anything. I remembered the constant drip of water in the corner. Water and electricity. An idea started to form. A terrible, dangerous idea. But it was also filled with a terrifying, brilliant kind of hope. It had to be the key. My plan came from the only two things I could count on in that room: the darkness and the drip of water. The light bulb was my only shot at power, and the puddle was my only tool. He never left the light on for more than a minute, just long enough to drop the food and leave. But that minute was all I needed. My captor, in his arrogance, had missed the slow decay of the place. The electrical conduit on the wall was old. The plastic around it was brittle, and near the floor, I'd felt a tiny crack where the wiring was just slightly exposed. It was a tiny flaw in my prison's armor. I needed to create a diversion. I needed smoke. A lot of smoke, and fast. The plan was simple, but pulling it off would be terrifying. I needed three things: something to conduct electricity, fuel, and a spark. The conductor was the hardest part. I had nothing metal. He'd taken my belt, my watch, even the little metal tips on my shoelaces. Then, as I sat in the dark, feeling the worn fabric of my jeans, I found it. The brand patch on the back had a thin metallic thread woven into it for decoration. It was flimsy, but it was metal. I spent what felt like a full day painstakingly working it free with my teeth and broken fingernails. It was less than 3 inches long and thin as a hair. It was my only shot. The fuel was easier. For the past day, I'd been saving the dry paper wrappers from the bread rolls. I'd also unraveled thread from the hem of my shirt to create a little fluffy pile of cotton. It wasn't much, but I hoped it would be enough. The spark would come from the electricity. The plan was to use the tiny metal thread to short the exposed wires. One single spark was all I needed to light the cotton and paper. I went over it in my mind 1,000 times. The timing had to be perfect. My life was on the line. I decided to make my move during the evening feeding. He always seemed more tired then, his limp a little more obvious. It was a tiny advantage, but I'd take it. When I heard the familiar sounds of him unlocking the door, my heart started pounding like a drum against my ribs. This was it. No second chances. The lock turned. The door swung open, and the room was flooded with light. He was there, a silhouette, holding the water and the bread. My hands were slick with sweat. In the corner, I pushed the tiny metallic thread against the crack in the conduit. I tensed, bracing for the shock. A flash. A pop. A jolt of white-hot pain shot up my arm. I cried out and dropped the thread. For one horrible second, I thought I'd failed. My arm was numb. But then I saw it. A tiny, glowing orange ember in the pile of cotton. It was working. My captor took a step into the room, his head tilted. What was that? I didn't answer. I just shuffled backward, trying to look weak and scared. It wasn't hard. The ember caught, and a small flame started licking at the cotton, then the paper. Smoke began to pour out, thick and smelling awful. "What are you doing?" he snarled, his voice finally losing its calm. He took another step in, his eyes locked on the little fire. That was my chance. The distraction I needed. While he was staring at the flames, I lunged for the water bottle he'd just set down. I unscrewed the cap with my teeth, my hands shaking like crazy. The smoke was getting thicker, stinging my eyes, making it hard to breathe. The room was so small, it was filling up fast. He turned back to me, his face a mask of pure fury. "You foolish." He never finished. I threw the water from the bottle right onto the fire. It wasn't enough to put it out, but it reacted with whatever was burning, creating a huge, instant cloud of thick, black, choking smoke. At the same time, I grabbed the bread roll. It was hard and stale, almost like a rock. As he staggered back from the smoke, blinded and coughing, I threw myself at him with everything I had. It wasn't skilled or graceful. It was pure, desperate survival. I slammed my shoulder into his stomach. He was bigger and stronger, but my attack was fueled by surprise and adrenaline. He stumbled backward with a grunt, hitting the wall. I didn't wait. I swung the hard bread roll in my fist as hard as I could and hit him on the side of the head. It was a pathetic weapon, but it made a sickening thud. He staggered, his eyes wide with shock more than pain. It was my only chance. The fight was just a messy, desperate scramble in a smoke-filled room. He was choking and disoriented, but he was furious. He grabbed for me, his fingers digging into my arm like steel claws. Pain shot through me, but adrenaline was burning away everything but the need to get out. I twisted and kicked out, hitting his knee. I heard a crack, and he roared in pain, his grip loosening for just a second. It was all I needed. I ripped my arm free and scrambled past him toward the one thing I had dreamed of for 72 hours. The open door. I burst out into a dim, musty corridor. A basement. I didn't stop to look. I just ran. Past shelves stacked with dusty boxes, past old furniture covered in sheets. Up a short flight of wooden stairs, I threw myself against the door at the top. It was locked. Panic clawed at me. I could hear him screaming my name behind me, his voice choked with smoke and rage. I rattled the doorknob. Useless. I was trapped again. Then I saw it. To the right of the door, a small, grimy basement window, right at ground level. It was my only way out. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could see, an old toolbox, and threw it at the glass. The sound of the window shattering was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of freedom. I didn't care about the jagged shards of glass left in the frame. I scrambled through the opening, feeling the glass slice into my hands and legs. The pain barely registered. I was out. I was lying in wet grass, blinking up at a gray sky. The air was so cold and fresh, it burned my smoke-filled lungs. For a second, I just lay there, overwhelmed by the open space, the smell of rain, the distant sound of a car. But his voice, closer now, from inside the house, snapped me back to reality. I couldn't stay here. I got to my feet, my legs shaking. I was in the backyard of a totally normal house in a normal-looking neighborhood. Manicured lawns, a kid's tricycle flipped over on a patio. It was surreal. I didn't know which way to go, so I just picked a direction and ran. I jumped a low fence, stumbled across another lawn, and burst onto a quiet street. My clothes were torn and filthy. I was bleeding from a dozen cuts. I must have looked insane. A woman walking her dog saw me, her eyes went wide, and she quickly crossed the street to get away from me. My first thought was to find the police, to scream for help. But then his words echoed in my head. He knew my name. I'd seen his expensive suit, his watch. This wasn't some random thug. He had money, power. What if he'd already twisted the story? What if the police were looking for me? For some mentally unstable guy who had a breakdown? It would be his word against mine, and I was a mess. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't trust anyone. I had to disappear. I stuck to the side streets, head down. Every person I passed felt like a threat. Every car that slowed down sent a jolt of terror through me. I found a public restroom in a small park and saw myself in the mirror. It was a shock. My face was smudged with soot, my eyes were wild, my hair was a mess. I washed the blood and grime off my face and hands. I had no phone, no wallet, no ID. He'd taken it all. I checked my pockets out of habit and found something. A crumpled 20-euro note I'd forgotten about. It was almost nothing, but right then, it felt like a fortune. It was enough for a train ticket. A ticket to anywhere. I walked until I reached the city's central station. The noise, the crowds, the lights were overwhelming. I pulled my hood up and bought a one-way ticket for the next train leaving. I didn't even care where it was going. East. That's all that mattered. While I was waiting on the platform, trying to be invisible, I saw it. A TV on the wall was playing the news. And I saw his face. My captor. He was wearing a different suit, his expression a mask of deep concern. The headline read, "Prominent businessman appeals for information on missing colleague." And right next to him was a picture of me. Smiling, happy. A photo from my company's website. He was talking to the reporter, his voice full of fake worry. He mentioned my recent struggles, my erratic behavior. He was painting me as unstable, a danger to myself. He said he was just a worried friend. My head started spinning. He wasn't just hunting me. He was erasing me. He was turning the whole world into his hunting ground and painting me as the prey. The police wouldn't be looking for a kidnapper. They'd be looking for me. My escape hadn't ended the nightmare. It just made the cage bigger. The train's whistle blew. I got on, found a seat, and just stared out the window as the city lights faded into darkness. I was free, but I had never felt more trapped in my entire life. The clatter of the train on the tracks was the only sound for hours. With every mile, the city got farther away, but the feeling of him being right there only got stronger. His face on that screen was burned into my mind. He wasn't some shadow in a dark room anymore. He was a public figure, a concerned friend. He was using his name and his money to weave a net, and I was caught in the middle of it. I stayed on that train as long as I could, changing lines at a major station, using the last of my change to buy another ticket in a different direction. I barely slept. Every time the train slowed down, I'd scan the platform, looking for that forgettable, terrifying face in the crowd. I ended up in a big, anonymous city in Germany. I got off the train and just blended into the river of people. Without money or an ID, my options were running out fast. The first few nights were a cold, miserable blur. I slept in train station waiting rooms until security kicked me out, and in alleys behind smelly dumpsters. I learned how to survive. I learned which bakeries threw out their bread at closing time. I learned that public libraries are warm and you can stay there all day without anyone bothering you. I was invisible, just another nameless face on the street. And that invisibility was the only thing keeping me safe. The first sign that he was really on my trail came a week after I escaped. I was in a library, using a computer to check the news, searching for my name. I made a new, anonymous email address and sent one desperate message to a close friend back home. Just a vague, "I'm okay, but I'm in trouble. Don't trust what you hear." 2 days later, I logged in again. There was a reply, but it wasn't from my friend. The subject line was one word, "close." The email was short. "I enjoyed Hamburg. The architecture is lovely, but the weather is disagreeable. I think I'll try somewhere warmer, perhaps to the south. See you soon, Alex." My blood ran cold. I was in Hamburg. He hadn't just found me. He was playing with me. He'd hacked my email or my friends, and he was letting me know he was watching. This wasn't just about catching me anymore. He was enjoying the hunt. I left the library immediately, my paranoia on fire. I walked for hours, trying to get lost in the biggest crowds I could find. I found a donation bin and swapped my jacket for another one, pulling the hat down low over my face. I had to get out of the city. I hitched a ride with a truck driver who didn't ask questions, and we drove south through the night. He wanted me to go south, so I went south. I felt like a puppet, and he was pulling the strings. From Germany, I crossed into Austria, then Italy. Always moving. I survived by taking cash jobs nobody else wanted, washing dishes in filthy restaurant kitchens, hauling garbage at construction sites. I learned to live in the shadows, to get by with broken phrases in 3 different languages, to never stay in one place for more than a day or two. My life was a frantic chase across a continent that felt like it was shrinking around me. Every stranger's look felt like an accusation. Every cop I saw made my heart stop. He has money and power. He's turned my life into a chase across Europe, and he's always right behind me. I don't know how long I can keep running, how long I can survive like this. My only weapon is this story. My only hope is that someone out there will listen. If you want to see if I can stay one step ahead, if I can find a way to expose him before he finds me, make sure you subscribe. Because I have no idea how many more chapters this story has left. Right now, I'm in a crowded hostel in a city I won't name. I paid for one night with the money I made cleaning a grease trap. There are 8 other people in this room, and their snoring is a weird, temporary comfort. But even in a crowd, I feel totally alone. I keep checking the lock on the door. I'm sitting with my back against the wall, just watching the door. Every shadow looks like him. Every footstep in the hall sounds like his. The escape feels like a lifetime ago. This hunt, this is my life now. And I don't know if it will ever end. Wait, did you hear that? Someone's at the door.